Welcome back to the deep dive. You're here because you want the ultimate knowledge shortcut. And today we are getting into the mechanics of conflict resolution.
Specifically, mediation.
Specifically mediation, yes.
Yeah.
Because it's not just a cheaper way to avoid court. It's really the only path that lets you build a solution from the ground up, one that a judge could, never actually order.
It's where structure meets totally bespoke problem solving. People always call it effective and confidential, but I think the secret is really understanding the choreography, the 5 distinct stages.
That's our mission today. We want to break down those 5 phases for you, from the very first phone call to, hopefully, that final signed agreement.
And we want to shine a light on the core rules that govern every move.
Right. We're talking about the structure, but also those key moments where, everything can just pivot, where resolution suddenly seems possible.
And to do that, you have to start with the atmosphere. Before anyone even talks about stage 1, there are 3 core principles that define the entire environment. If these aren't there, you're not really mediating.
Okay, so lay them out for us. What are these 3 pillars?
First, and this is huge, it's entirely voluntary. You enter of your own free will, and this is crucial, you can leave at any point.
At any time.
Any time. If you feel it's not working or even unsafe, that right to just get up and walk away is what makes it so different from, say, litigation where you're compelled to be there.
That freedom must give people a lot of power, a lot of confidence to be more honest.
It does. And that honesty leads right into the second pillar, confidentiality.
Meaning, what happens in mediation stays in mediation.
Absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, not a single word discussed, not even the email setting it up can be shared outside that process. It's legally protected. It's what allows everyone to drop their public rigid positions and talk about what they really need.
Okay, so voluntary, confidential. What's the third pillar?
It's flexibility. We're going to talk about 5 stages. But really, the process can be adapted to whatever the parties need.
So if a joint meeting isn't working,
the mediator can just shift to private meetings. If you need more time to find a document, you can reschedule. The process, it bends to the people, not the other way around.
that framework is so important. But there's one single rule that sort of hangs over everything.
Yes.
The golden rule, right?
Yes. It's the ultimate protection against premature celebration.
Which is?
Nothing is agreed until everything is agreed by everyone. And it's all written down in a signed, legally binding agreement.
So you could shake hands on 99 things, but if that one last detail isn't sorted,
The whole deal is off. It keeps the pressure on to actually finish the job.
a crucial framework. Okay, let's jump into the mechanics. Stage 1. Before anyone even gets in the same room.
Right. Stage 1, the pre-mediation or preparation stage. This is where the foundation for a successful day is laid, often without the parties even realizing it.
And it's more than just, picking a mediator and booking a conference room, which the lawyers usually handle. This is the information phase.
It is. The key document here is usually called a position statement. The lawyers will send this to the mediator. It's basically a booklet of documents that outlines the dispute and, what their client thinks they want.
That sounds pretty formal, just legal papers.
It can be, but the mediator's job is to go beyond the paper. They don't just read the file. They hold separate introductory meetings, often just a phone call or a Zoom with each side,
What for?
to introduce themselves, explain the rules, and really importantly, start to get a feel for the relationship between the parties, not just the legal facts.
And this is also where the most important piece of paper gets signed,
Yeah.
the one that locks in all those principles we talked about.
The agreement to mediate, yes, everyone signs it. The mediator, the parties, their lawyers, and signing that it's a real mental shift. It commits you to the process, it guarantees the confidentiality, covers the fees, and in some places it even has to confirm you have the right to get independent legal advice.
So once the prep is done, the paperwork signed, we move into the formal kickoff.
Stage 2, the opening stage. This is usually the most formal part of the day.
Everyone in one room.
In most commercial cases, yes, a joint meeting or a plenary session. The mediator gives their official welcome, they set the ground rules, no interruptions, be respectful, and they remind everyone about the confidentiality they just signed up for.
And then the parties make their opening statements.
Well,
Now, is this always the lawyers talking, or is there an advantage to having the people themselves speak?
that is often the first big strategic decision of the day. And while lawyers are fantastic at laying out the legal case, the truly powerful move is often letting the parties speak for themselves.
Why is that so impactful? What does it change?
Well, for a couple of reasons. First, this might be the first time they've spoken directly in months or even years. Hearing the emotion, the actual impact from the other person's mouth, it can completely change the energy in the room.
And the second reason?
When a party speaks for themselves, they talk about what's really important to them. Not just the legal claim, but, the personal or emotional cost.
That makes sense. You get past the legal position, and you hear the human pain point. But what if the conflict is just too high, too volatile for a joint meeting?
Then the mediator uses that flexibility principle. They just bypass the giant opening and start the process separately with each side. Safety and consent always, always come first.
Okay, so that brings us right into the core of the work. We've heard the positions, now you have to get under the surface.
Exactly. Stage 3, the exploration stage. This is where the mediator sort of shifts from being a referee to being more of a conflict detective.
Because the opening statements, they're just the tip of the iceberg, right? The surface issue.
They're what people are suing for. They're public demands. The exploration stage is all about uncovering the complex conflict that's simmering underneath. You have to address those root needs and fears for any deal to actually last.
So how do they do that? What tools does a mediator use when everyone is, naturally guarded?
Their main tool is asking questions. Lots and lots of open questions, the kind you can't just answer with yes or no.
To get them talking.
To get them talking about their worries, about what they feel they've lost, and what a good outcome might look like to them, even if it feels impossible at that moment.
So the goal isn't just to confirm facts, it's to draw out their interests and needs, which are different from their legal positions.
Precisely. A party's position might be, I need $50,000. But through exploration, a mediator might find out their interest is actually, I need enough money to reopen my business. And if you can find a creative way to meet that interest, maybe it's not cash, maybe it's a future contract, then that $50,000 position suddenly becomes, well, a lot less important.
That's the unlock moment. But that's still just understanding the problem. How do you pivot from understanding to actually solving it?
And that takes us straight into stage 4, the negotiation stage. This is the pivotal part. It can also be pretty grueling. This is where solutions are built and tested.
And the mediator's role here is really delicate. They have to help people when they get stuck, but they also have to stay totally impartial.
Independent, impartial, and they cannot, I repeat, cannot offer their own solutions. They facilitate, they don't decide.
So what does that look like?
The first phase is option generation, just brainstorming. Everyone throws out every possible idea for a settlement. The motto here is quantity over quality. Just get the ideas on the table.
But coming up with 50 ideas is easy. Agreeing on one is the hard part. How does the mediator help narrow it down?
They use a few key techniques, but the most important one is called reality testing.
Reality testing, what's that?
It's where the mediator, usually in a private session, gently but firmly challenges a party's assumptions.
Give me an example of that. How does that break a deadlock?
Okay, so say one side is refusing to budge from an offer that's just completely unrealistic.
Right.
The mediator will take them aside and ask some pointed questions like, okay, if you walk away today, what's your best case scenario in court? And what's your worst? Realistically, what do you think a judge is going to do? And what will it cost you in time, stress, and legal fees to find out?
So they're forcing them to confront their alternative.
Yeah.
Their Baytani best alternative to a negotiated agreement.
Correct. By shining a cold, hard light on the risks and costs of fighting, that imperfect deal on the table suddenly starts to look a whole lot better. It narrows the options and helps the mediator package them into a real settlement proposal.
I can imagine this stage takes a long time. 8, 10, 12 hours sometimes. People must get exhausted and just want to give up.
It's mentally and emotionally draining. A huge part of the mediator's skill is just managing that energy, that emotional temperature. They know when to take breaks, when to push, and when to just remind people how much work they've already put in.
So if that persistence pays off, you finally get to the finish line.
Stage 5, the agreement stage.
And this is where it all becomes official.
It is. The settlement is drafted right then and there, usually by the lawyers with the mediator sort of looking over their shoulder.
And what is the mediator looking for? What are they making sure is in there?
They're making sure it's comprehensive. It's not enough to just write, Party A pays Party B X amount. The mediator makes sure all those little practical details get recorded.
Like what?
Like the payment schedule, confidentiality clauses, when an asset will be transferred, who gets to write the press release, all the small stuff that can blow up a deal later if it's not written down.
And the final document, it has to have the right legal weight to it.
Of course. The lawyers make sure it's in the right format. It could be a simple contract. But if the case was already in the court system, it's much better to get it turned into a court order.
Why is that?
It's just much, much easier to enforce if someone defaults down the road.
That makes sense. Now, before we get into some specific context, let's just go back to something you mentioned, these private meetings. They sound essential.
They are. They're often called a caucus or single sessions. They're just private meetings between the mediator and one side.
And because of that confidentiality pillar, whatever you say in that caucus, it stays in the caucus.
Stays in the room unless you give the mediator express permission to share it. Think of it as a safe room. It's where you can be totally honest, test out an offer you're not ready to make public yet, or admit a weakness in your case without the other side hearing it.
That candor must be what really moves the needle. I think you also mentioned a cross caucus.
Yes, that's a bit more specialized. That's when the mediator meets just with the lawyers from both sides. It's useful if the parties are too emotional to talk, or if there's a really technical legal point that the lawyers just need to sort out between themselves.
But even with all this process, sometimes it just doesn't work. An agreement isn't reached.
It happens. Sometimes the gap is just too wide, or maybe the mediation was just held too early or too late. But I'd argue the process is almost never a complete failure.
Really? How so?
Because even if you don't get a signature, you've forced everyone to explore their real interests, to reality test their positions. The communication lines are open, and very often a deal is reached in the days or weeks that follow.
Okay, that's an important point. Let's pivot now to time and context, because this one full day model isn't universal, is it?
Not at all. For big commercial or civil disputes, yes, a full day is standard. It keeps the focus and momentum. But for online mediations or family and workplace disputes, the structure changes quite a bit.
How does it change for, say, online mediation?
Well, screen fatigue is real, so online mediations are usually broken up into a series of shorter sessions, maybe 2 or 3 hours each, spread over a few days or weeks.
And that's the same for family and workplace issues.
It is, but for a different reason. Those disputes are just so emotionally draining. People need time between sessions to decompress, maybe get some legal advice, or just gather their thoughts. A full 10-hour day would be completely counterproductive.
Speaking of family disputes, the sources highlighted some really crucial differences there. It's a highly specialized area.
It is. The approach has to be different. For one thing, the lawyers typically do not attend the sessions.
Oh, that's interesting. So they're not in the room?
They're not in the room. They advise their clients before and between the sessions on their rights and on any offers being made, but they aren't present during the actual negotiation.
That's a huge difference. What's the most important protective step a mediator takes in a family case?
Without a doubt, it's the pre-mediation screening meetings. They are always held separately and privately with each person.
And this is to check for?
To check for things like domestic abuse or coercive control. The mediator has to be sure that one person isn't being intimidated or compromised, that they can actually advocate for themselves freely. If they can't, mediation just might not be appropriate at all.
A fundamental safeguard. What about financial issues? How does confidentiality work when you're dividing up property?
That's the big exception to the rule. Any financial disclosure, assets, debts, income, has to be done on an open document.
So it's not confidential.
It's not, and that's for a purely practical reason. That information needs to be verifiable. It might have to be shown to accountants or to a court to get the final agreement formalized.
So even the agreement itself needs an external stamp of approval.
In family law, absolutely. The agreement often has to be turned into a court order to make a divorce official or to ensure that what's called proper provision has been made for the children and both spouses. The law provides that final safeguard.
This has been a fantastic breakdown of the complexity behind this process. We've gone through the 5 stages: preparation, opening, exploration, negotiation, and agreement. What's the big takeaway for our listener?
I think the takeaway is that mediation is, at its heart, a structured path out of chaos. It provides an impartial guide to shift the whole conversation away from rigid legal positions and towards, underlying human needs. And that combination of structure and flexibility is what gives the parties the best possible chance to find their own solution.
It's fascinating. But I want to leave you, our listener, with one last thought about this process, especially when it seems to fail. If you go through mediation and you don't get a signed agreement on the day, what is the residual value that you carry forward?
That's a great question. The power of mediation isn't only in the signature, it's in the shift in perspective.
How so?
Even without a deal, you walk away knowing their true needs. You know the absolute limits of their position. You've seen how your arguments hold up to reality testing. You've uncovered information you never would have gotten in a formal court process. So the question is, how does knowing all of that change your strategy when you walk into that courtroom next week?
An entirely new field of information unlocked.
Well,
Thank you for taking the deep dive with us. We'll see you next time.